Hey everyone, I just want to say thank you so much, and welcome to another video series of ours that we put together to help managers out there to be able to learn how to be able to take care of business, to take care of the inside part of their company. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining us in this this video series about understanding employee termination. A lot of us unfortunately don't want to go into this area of things, and at times is we don't really like the feeling that we're putting something like this together, but we need to be able to know that this is very important to be able to have. And I'm glad that I'm able to share this with you guys, and be able to direct you guys to what you may face and how to be able to face things. Okay, for many practicing managers, the hardest thing you'll ever do is to let someone go. Okay, it's really hard. Firing an employee can be very difficult. It does pose, okay, several types of risks and can cause strong emotions for those that are involved. However, when you look at termination in perspective, you'll see that it is a tool that, when used responsibly and with care, can help make your team and your organization stronger. Okay, unfortunately, the emotional nature of termination often leads to people to take an extreme position. A small number of managers to decide to terminate people very quickly, almost at the first sign of a problem. Another small group of managers choose to never fire anyone at all, no matter how might it be justified. Let's just take a minute to consider both of these extreme and unacceptable positions. Let's think about the manager who fires too quickly. First, it should be noted, right, that in face of extreme employee behavior, an immediate firing could be justified. Consider, for example, violations or violence or embezzling. Outside of the extremes, when a strong conversation, a small reprimand may be appropriate. Some managers still seeks to fire someone. They may be driven by anger, a desire to appear tough, or at the same time is selfish motives as to be able to change the mix of talents in the team. No matter whatever happens, acting fast can be a problem. Aside from possible legal troubles, consider this. First, you're going to seriously hurt the person you fired. Your haste will have created unnecessary anger, confusion, and immense stress. Next, moving too fast makes you look very harsh in the eyes of others. Whether it's justified or not, to fire someone very quickly will move others to see you as cold and lacking compassion. Finally, when you fire someone too quickly, you harm the team. When they watch your behavior, it creates fear, and that erodes trust in you. As a consequence, you've moved the team closer to mere compliance as opposed to real commitment. Okay? Moving too fast is rarely the right choice because you do want to give second chances and stay focused on employee development. Having said that, you can also move too slow, and the results can be just as bad or even worse than moving too fast. If you're in a group that never wants to fire anyone, you need to understand that you might be causing a lot of unintended harm. First, you're harming the person who actually does need to be fired. They're learning from you that it is okay to underperform or to engage, counterproductive work. You're helping them feel entitled. You know, Later when they work for someone else, they won't have a realistic understanding, okay? They won't have that realistic understanding of what real performance standards look like. Next, your reputation will take a hit. If you consistently to choose not to address strong employee problems, people will not respect you. In fact, in many companies, this behavior will eventually get you fired or get you in trouble. Finally, this behavior upsets the team and damages chemistry, camaraderie, and productivity. The team will spend time behind your back talking about how this issue has not been addressed and how angry they are that they have to continue acting like the person in question belongs on the team. So, instead of these two extreme positions, you're going to check your emotions and learn how to use the termination process thoughtfully and respectfully. In fact, if used correctly, the termination process can help you realize two huge benefits. Okay, The first is the genuine chance to help your team improve itself. Employee turnovers for most teams tend to be small over time, which means you don't have enough chances to be able to start learning this. Firing someone when it's needed can be difficult, but hiring a new team member can be a great silver lining. Believe it or not, the second benefit concerns the person being fired. When termination is handled correctly, it often provides a person a much needed wake up call. They learn that continued employment must be earned. They also learn that the behavior they've done does have consequences. These insights could be terribly useful to them, okay, to be able to move forward in life. So I'll admit to you guys, firing someone is not fun at all. But when you do it right, okay, you help the team, you help your company. You've strengthened your reputation as a reasonable manager, and it's even possible in the long term you've helped the person you had to terminate. Now that is hard to accept, right? But let's go ahead and keep on going at this. It's one thing to determine that you want to start the termination process and fire someone. It's another thing altogether to be sure that your actions are in line with relevant state and federal laws, company policies, and any other prevailing norms where you work. Your goal is twofold. First, you want to be able to remove a person or persons from a company who needs to be removed. Second, you want to be able to avoid wrongful termination lawsuits. The legal aspects of letting someone go can be very serious. So let me start with a clear disclaimer, okay? A video like this isn't not enough. This will be a useful introduction, but before you consider letting someone go, you have to consult with the professionals who know the laws and other employment guidelines that should be applied to the case that you're considering. Typically, you'll start by seeing someone in the HR or a legal professional. They can help avoid costly mistakes. For example, in some states, even if you follow the letter of the law, but you fire someone in a manner that's different than how it's been done in the past, you can get in trouble still. That's why you want to be able to seek expert advice. There are many employment laws that might be cited when someone wants to sue for wrongful termination. These include the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, okay, the American with Disability Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, the Equal Pay Act, and many, many more. And in addition, there are many state laws to consider as well. Now, many first-time managers think that they don't need to worry about being sued because they work in a state that uses what's called an employment at will, okay? This means an employer can terminate an employee at any time for any reason except an illegal reason, without any legal liabilities. In turn, the employee is free to leave a job at any time for any reason, again, with no legal liability. That's a general presumption of most states, but it can be changed in an employment contract. And it's also true, there are exceptions to this rule. For example, just because there's employment, okay, at will form doesn't mean you can fire someone as a retaliation for filing a claim or asserting their legal rights. Nor can you fire them for refusing to do something illegal. And you certainly can't discriminate them. In fact, discrimination is one of the most common claims used in a wrongful termination suits. Here, the former employee and their lawyers use the federal anti-discrimination statutes, which prohibits firing or refusing to hire a person based on race, their religion, their age, handicap status, or one of the several other factors. Another very common type of lawsuit concerns exempt, okay, versus non-exempt status. Early mentioned, I talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act, or what they call the FLSA. This law states that exempt employees are not eligible for overtime pay. The exempt are typically salaried professionals, whereas the non-exempt are what we call hourly. So, whether or not a particular job is legally classified as an exempt versus a non-exempt can save a company money or cost them a lot of money. The FLSA and every other major employment law, okay, has many important details, probably more than any one manager can learn or remember. And based what happens in the courts each year, they keep on changing. If you are among the minority of employers who who work with labor unions, you have yet another set of consideration set forth in a union contract. Here you'll face definitions about what constitutes a just cause, for a termination, even if you're in an employment at will state. So what's an average manager supposed to do with this? First and foremost, know who is your go-to person is for at work. Who's that go-to person at work that has expertise in this matter? Okay, guys, so in this part of the video, we're going to be talking about reviewing the termination process, okay? So we're going to get started with that. So once again, we're going to be talking about reviewing the termination process, knowing when termination is appropriate, and also dealing with serious offenses, okay? So let's go ahead and get started on that, okay? All right, so to begin, let's start by clearly focusing on one very important fact. Employee termination should be viewed as a process, not a simple event. The actual act of firing someone is only one of several steps you would want to consider in order to be able to make that separation as effective as possible. There's a lot to consider, and most of it begins long and before the actual leading with employees given the news. It all starts with clear work rules and policies. I don't wish to encourage excessive bureaucracy, but basic rules should be clear, formal, and made accessible to your employees, and consistently applied across all employees. Non-existent or sloppy policies are often a problematic thing later when you wish to terminate an employee. Next is the ongoing process of observing and documenting performances. As a leader, you are always collecting data because data is the backbone of your future decisions, including terminations. If you would like a more lengthy discussion about how this is done, we have actually other courses that are available for you guys that we want to be able to share with you. It's about performance review, fundamentals. Next, the process is escalating feedback. Long before actual termination proceedings begin, your role is to be as helpful and to give critical feedback to assist that employee to meet the required work standards. And if needed, the process escalates to formal warnings or some form of an improvement plan if performance is consistently low. At this stage, if you are ready to let that person to let them go, you need to start the formal documentation that would be required for you to be able to do this. This includes any requirement forms that you have created or performance documentations that you put together, that you've annotated, as needed, and make it clearly as possible. What follows is this. In some workplaces, you'll submit the file to a review board and they'll make a decision. In other workplaces, there is no review boards, but you are still wise if you seek counsel for more experienced managers and HR managers to be able to ensure the quality of your case. When a decision is actually made to terminate, now you have to be able to create a termination agreement. This document will state that employment will cease as of a particular date. It will state the cause of the termination, any issues regarding wages and separations and severance forms or severance fees, and all pertinent facts surrounding the employee's benefits. After the termination, you'll want to consider any potential security concerns given the particular employee in question. Now, violence or aggression is very rare, but you're smart to consider the possibility. A good rule of thumb is to be able to have somebody there present with you. The last thing before the meeting is to take a few minutes to prepare yourself mentally. Okay, letting someone go is not easy. You become very aware of the stress and difficulty you're about to create in that person's life, even if they really, really earned it. Stay focused on the fact that by this point, you've done all that you could possibly to help that person. And that what you're really doing is you're trying to ensure the long-term success of your company, your team. Be sure to at least find one confidant with whom you can speak to openly. You definitely want an outlet that will allow you to talk through the issues to help reduce the stress, okay? Finally, it's time for that meeting. We'll talk more in the details shortly, but just remember that the success of that meeting depends heavily on all the homework that we have just discussed. The good news is that if you're well prepared, the meeting itself will be very short and to the point, usually over in just a few minutes. After talking with that person and hopefully after obtaining a signed termination agreement, you'll collect company property from them and escort them from the building or the property. But you're still not done. Your last step is to appropriately follow up with the team. When someone is fired, many people experience emotions, not just the person that got fired, Your job is to be able to manage this process and reduce ambiguity by proactively addressing the issues with your whole team. The key to surviving any difficult challenge is to be able to breaking things down in smaller chunks and doing homework. You want to be able to plan to be successful. The same is true when you are doing any terminations. When you engage and respect each of the steps of the process, the odds are your employees will be calm upon hearing the news, your case will be strong and unquestioned, and the team will remain in the loop of understanding why you did what you did. Okay, so here's a tough question. How do you know when to stop giving more chances and advice and reprimands and actually decide to let an employee go? The truth is, it is not a perfect science, but if you're paying attention and know what to look for, you can make the right call. Let's start with extreme behaviors. Sometimes, unfortunately, employees make it easy on you and act out in a way that would require swift dismissal. For example, any kind of violence, getting caught engaging in any sexual harassments, drug or alcohol use at work, embezzling company assets, or giving away or selling proprietary information. In many of these cases, immediate action is always required, potentially not just involving security or HR, but maybe the police. Most employee performance or behavior problems are not extreme and do not warrant an immediate termination. Thus, your job is a bit more difficult. You have to be very vigilant in making observations and documenting behaviors. Typically, your efforts will correct the performance issues, but if they don't, it's maybe time to consider letting them go. Now, my assumption from here on out is that you have already progressed through tough conversations, performance improvement plans, and even possibly reprimands. Under those conditions, you can have the confidence that making a termination decision by thinking through these 4 questions. First, and this is by far the most important question, do you have a well-documented and prolonged, performance trend? When I say performance, I'm referring to their ability to do their job as well as all of the people-related behaviors that are vital to helping the team. Thus, your documented performance record might specify how tasks are late, incomplete, or full of errors. Or you might be documenting serious communication problems, some other interpersonal issues, or maybe even problems with integrity. And of course, sometimes it might be even both of these type of problems. What you're looking for is a clear trend over time. If you have had one casual, conversation and has seen no improvement, it's not time to let him go. If, however, you have had several, conversations, 2 poor employee evaluations, and a performance improvement plan that has not helped at all, and it is well documented, now you're really ready for a serious decision. Be clear, if you have a well documented negative performance trend, it may be all that you need to have confidence in your decision. However, consider these additional questions that will even add more clarity for you. Are others in the team aware and is upset about this particular person? It's one thing, for a person to underperform and show in your radar. It's another thing altogether for someone's performance or behavior to threaten team camaraderie and productivity. It does not matter if they're habitually slow or forcing other teammates to pick up the slack, or if they are unruly, who are constantly starting conflict. In either case, when a team starts spending time thinking about this person and talking about this person, it's time for a change. By the way, it's not just team performance that's in jeopardy, but your reputation as a manager, your company. The next thing is, are outsiders, reacting negatively with this person? Here, I'm referring to other people in other parts of the company, customers, clients, patients, vendors, other stakeholders of whom this person regularly interacts. If you hear any of them concerns, any concerns from them, listen carefully, okay? Because now it's not just your reputation, your company's reputation is being threatened, it's the whole group in general, okay? Now finally, ask this question. When you're around this person, are you at ease or do you often cringe? What's your gut reaction when you're in their presence? If more often than not you cringe, something has to change. And in that stage, even if you are not aware of it, the whole team is already doing the talking already as it is. If you have trouble feeling proud about this person being your team, it's probably time for change. There isn't a simple formula that when it's time to let somebody go. Unfortunately, Since it's such a difficult decision, too many managers simply try not to even think about it. That makes letting somebody go can be very difficult, but it doesn't have to be difficult at all. If you pay attention to the performance trend that you're documenting, listen carefully to others, to the team, and remember to listen to your gut too. You will make the right decision for that employee, for the team, and for the company as well. So, it's very important to be able to know that. Now, one important way to categorize termination is to differentiate between termination due to poor performance versus termination due to employee misconduct. Generally speaking, a poor performance, such as being a slow learner or not really completing tasks on time, is not misconduct. It could be in case of deliberate lack of effort or indifference, but typically it's not called misconduct. Labels and definitions do vary by state, but in effect, you often see them create a two-tier system. For example, you might see labels such as employees misconduct used for lesser infractions versus employee gross misconducts, which is reserved for more serious violations. In either case, we are referring to employee conduct that flagrantly or intentionally disregards employers' interests or company's interests and has a clear impact on your company. There are many examples of employee misconduct that immediately or over time might be cause for termination. Just to name a few, consider these examples: theft, fraud, intoxication or drug use, intentional damage to property or assets, violence, creating a hostile environment, okay? Or repeated acts of insubordination. When you start thinking about these type of behaviors, even though some seem clear-cut, you have to start thinking about the issue of severity. Behaviors in the less objectionable behaviors we term simply as misconduct could lead to a termination if it is repeated, whereas behaviors in the highly objectionable group or term gross misconduct would lead to immediate firing. There's always some interpretation to be done by you and your organization, and sometimes by court. It is fairly easy to see this two-tier dichotomy. For example, consider a bakery worker who takes a loaf of bread without paying for it versus a bank employee who steals a bundle of money. Both are crimes, but most observers and most legal authorities view them as qualitatively different, depending on their severity. So this brings up the topic of warnings. When they're warranted for behavioral infractions, use them. Make sure that the incident, becomes a formal part of the employee's record. That would be appropriate for the case of, the stolen loaf of bread. Now, every state is different, but the point is the same. You have to document everything. Document any minor infractions, any large infractions, any disruptive attitude. Now, look, stealing money from the bank makes it easy for you to make the decision. But for minor issues, it's up to you to be able to build a case over time. One special case that can be talked about here is involving severe extreme behavior, such as the violence, or imminent threat of violence. In this case, you need to start thinking about your safety or your employee's safety. Now, first, be sure to know your employment's or your organization's policies regarding these matters. Typically, with violence or threats, security or the police should be called immediately. Ideally, you will not intervene, okay? You will not intervene with the person who's engaging, some form of violent behavior. If you can reasonably stall or isolate them to, do so. But your goal is not to intervene. That's a role for a trained professional and police. Okay, it's decision time. When faced with what we've been calling gross misconduct, the decision is often easy. The person needs to be fired, and that process should begin immediately. The majority of cases, however, consist of smaller infractions, which means you will have to collect data again, and try to make a decision when the time is literally right. Your decision will consist of three components: the nature of the current offense, the proof you have, or do not have, and the employee's history. First is the nature of the current offense. If it were violence, for example, the decision is easy. It's very easy. Now, initiate termination. If, however, the infraction was yet another instance of being late for work, you had to think further, because this is what we call a low severity infraction. The next thing to consider is the proof you have. If someone is late and your workplace uses time clocks or employee badges, documenting the infraction is easy and automatic. In contrast, if you're talking about disruptive attitude and the proof is basically hearsay, well, that's not real proof, okay? It's a lower form of evidence. So finally, consider the person's history. If the infraction is small, such as being late, and the proof is strong, but it's the first time they've ever been late, there's no misconduct justifying the termination. But if they're late, it's well documented. Let's say, for example, this is their 5th instance, and they've been warned numerous times. Termination then becomes far more defensible, right? No manager relishes the need to reprimand and fire employees, but I can tell you this. What's worse is engaging the process improperly in a manner that allows the employee to remain in the team. Follow the advice that we just talked about or discussed here, and you'll more likely make termination decisions that stick, which ultimately are decisions that improve the quality of your team, okay? So let's move on to the next set of information we should talk about, which is performance-based. So I've said it before, I've said it again. Quality documentation of a performance problem or employee misconduct is vital. Poor behavior at work can sometimes fail to be enough to let someone go. It has to be properly documented, otherwise you might be forced to keep the person in your team. Believe it or not, even if in the face of a very difficult behavior, it's common for a manager to not properly document the offense for several reasons. Likely, the most common problem is a belief that they are simply too busy to immediately address the issue. Now, outside of truly extreme behaviors, they say to themselves, I see that's an issue, but I'm busy, so I'll get to it later. And then they lose interest or even forget to follow it up entirely. Another very common explanation, for poor documentation is simple conflict of avoidance. People don't like conflict. We can easily sense it, but we very often, choose to look the other way. This gets a lot of managers and company owners get into trouble. They see these unacceptable poor performance behaviors or misconduct, and they look away by thinking to themselves, it's not that bad, or maybe they think, the team will take care of that. Or of course, we have to remember that when we avoid conflict, it almost always grows. Finally, another reason why we don't document issues like we should is because we don't appreciate the standards that will be applied later when we actually want to let someone go. We see an incident and we write down the date, the issue, the summary or short conversation we had with the person. Sounds good, right? Maybe not. You wrote down the date, but not the time and place. You made no note of whether this was the first conversation or not, and you didn't speak to any witnesses. Overall, this could mean you didn't procedurally address this employee trend in a manner similar to how others in your organizations have done it in the past. All of which means you documented the issue, but not adequately enough to make a termination decision stick. Okay, so now you know what you are up against. The good news is that today you have many useful ways to properly document an employee issue. The first and the most important is always will be your performance diary. For a detailed discussion of the performance diary, check out another one of our courses that we actually have. And I would love to share that with you guys. It's called Performance Review Fundamentals. For now, it's not enough to say that the performance diary or is a notebook or computer file you use to continually document your observation about the performance of each of your direct reports. You should use it for just a few minutes every day after important interactions with your team. In addition, today you have many other options, including actual work samples, customer surveys, 360 evaluations, video of interaction of work, automated, tracking data of work, and then you also have your formal letters of reprimands, and also at the same time, eventually performance improvement plans and the formal paperwork used by human resources when someone is terminated. This all might sound excessive, but in the case of particularly bad behavior, which might be the precursor of a termination, you have to go an extra mile. For example, if you observe someone being hostile to another person or to a client, you can observe and document this, or you can observe, document, and then briefly individually chat with the 3 other employees who possibly witnessed or heard the incident. I don't want you to become a private investigator or overly paranoid. This is simply about doing a reasonable due diligence to protect the team and the company. Here's my quick advice. First, when in doubt, document an incident fully. That means, all details, all relevant details. Now, of course, not later. Next, when you doubt whether or not your documentation is thorough enough, I want you to do two things. Start by going one additional step further with your efforts. Then, follow up by seeking advice of a more experienced manager or a proper HR representative to help guide you and ensure your effort, okay, that your effort will stand up to scrutiny if they're, will stand up to scrutiny later on, okay? One of the unexpected tasks you pick up when you join a leadership team is documenting performance. You have to do this to support when making decisions of providing praise or reprimand. And also you have to be able to use this definitely to be able to support, any big decisions such as a termination. Do yourself a favor for me. Follow the suggestions we just discussed, and then, when needed, you'll be making more justified and defensible decisions about letting them go later on. Okay, so now, when you first start thinking in the near future where you might need to let someone go, I want you to start being proactive. That means you need to think about the person in question and document their performance. But it also means you need to start thinking about the other players who matter as well, specifically the leadership team, the human resources department, and the rest of the team that you manage. However, your very first task is to understand your company's policies surrounding reprimands and terminations. Know them well, because even in the face of poor performance or bad behavior, if you don't follow procedures correctly, you can lose the power to make decisions as you see fit. Assuming they exist where you work, go find them. They'll tell you about what constitutes an infraction, and they'll often lay out classes of infractions, some small, some big. They also clarify what type of documentations are needed, okay, when particular types of reprimands are to be used, and when and who to notify following certain behaviors. Now, the better you know this material, the better you'll avoid mistakes that will cost you later on. Okay, after brushing up with our policies, your first two targets are the leadership team and the HR team. Now, when I say the leadership team, I mean two things. First, okay, I just want you to be aware of the people, that people talk and that your actions will be visible and will affect your reputation. That is why, second, you want to identify one or two people above you in the hierarchy with whom you'll discuss the employee in question, your plans for dealing with the situation, and their advice about the matter given their knowledge about company policies and precedents. One of them should very likely be your direct supervisor. How you approach them matters a lot. Don't say you need their help or that you don't know what to do. Say that you're considering a possibility or a course of action and you would like to hear their thoughts about a person with more experience like them. This way, you've shown your ability to make a decision and you've shown a desire to keep them in the loop and consider their views at the same time. Now, your actions won't surprise them and won't have the issues in the back of their mind when it's time to consider personnel issues for the next budget cycle. And if you expect the budget to replace the person, let them know informally now to see how they will react. Also, if they ask you whether or not you've been to HR yet, tell them no, that you wanted to touch base with them first. Assuming you weren't advised against it, the next stop is HR, where you will clarify what you have done so far, what you wish to do, and how that meshes with company policies and other legal considerations. HR is a vital resource, not only because they know the applicable laws, better than you, but also they know new court rules and legislations. Now, once again, it's useful for you to signal your desire to backfill this role should you decide to let them go. You never know what they might tell you about higher level personnel planning that's taking place that you need to know about. Now, turning to the issue of your team for a moment, let's be clear about your goals. The goal is to be honest without hurting yourself in the future. That means you need to be able to know the things that you can't even say, even if you have things that you want to say. For example, prior to termination, you don't share with anyone in the team your personal judgment about that particular person. You don't say that they are trouble or being targeted for a development, and you certainly don't talk about possible termination. To do any of these things during the middle of your investigation or your documentation about this particular employee can easily blow up in your face later on if reports of your comments will surface during the termination proceedings. If someone in the team specifically asked about the person, which is not uncommon if they are a difficult employee, don't make any negative comments and don't validate any negative comments, that others make. Instead, you give them what you call a honest, an honest comment, for example. That's what you should do. Let's say, for example, in a negative comment, you can say something like, there's always room for improvement, or you can say, let me worry about that person. You just focus on what you're doing. A successful termination is not just about if it's justified. That's of course a very important, but the real task is first ensuring that all the entities involved will correctly are correctly satisfied procedurally, right? That's the word. And second, making sure you don't accidentally cause yourself problems that hurt you later in the process. Now, if you'll remember the advice we just covered, you're much more likely to meet the expectations of all relevant parties, okay? All right, let's go move on. When someone finds out they're being let go, it's often very tough for them to process what that means, even if you're very clear about all the relevant issues that they need to hear. And even if you handed them in writing, it's not guaranteed that they'll hear and process everything that you're saying. Your job is to expect this and to be prepared. We can predict the questions you're most likely to encounter. Let's take a minute to name each one and consider what a good answer might look like. Let's start with one of the most common and to you maybe the most surprising. Why am I being let go? Your response is to repeat what you said to start meeting, that they're being let go and why. Be respectful and be brief, but don't go deeper than just a basic explanation. For example, you might say, John, your performance has been judged as not acceptable and your skill set no longer fits with the company's needs. No details are necessary or prudent. Discussion of the performance details ended before this meeting ever began. Next, they might ask, who made this decision? This one is very easy to say. As their supervisor, you need to own it. You made this decision. So say, I made this decision as it was discussed by the approved relevant of the management team, as well as human resources. That's it. If they ask about a specific person and their involvement, say, that's not relevant to this discussion. And then move on to the list of topics you need to cover. Many times, this will be followed with, what can I do to change this situation? This means that the reality is beginning to set into that person and they don't want to be fired. They want that what we call second chance. Politely but immediately say, the decision is final. Now there are several pieces of information I need to share with you. Then get started. Don't let them pull you into a discussion or a negotiation of any kind. It's also not uncommon for them to ask who else knows about this, right? What they really want to know is whether or not their colleagues know that they have been fired. Tell them no one knows a thing and they won't until after we've wrapped the meeting up. Help them gather their belongings, and so on. That's way, the person is left to be able to have to say something to them or to be able to, give them the time to be able to clean up their workspace before leaving the building. The next question will often be about exactly when they're being let go. For typically, non-voluntary separation, the answer is right now. That could prompt them to ask about uncompleted work, clients who need to be notified, and so on. Before this conversation even began, you already created a plan to have all works and work contacts addressed in the properly fashion, so you only have to tell them that you thought about that and that they don't have to worry about it because it's all been taken care of and all of the proper people will be notified. Now, hopefully, your employee has begun to fast forward a bit in their mind and accepted their new reality and began to think about the future. Thus, it's not uncommon to receive questions about using you for a job reference and using the company's resources for job counseling and a job search. Whatever your company's positions on this matter, know them and be ready to articulate them clearly. Finally, in words and writing, be ready to field any and all questions about pay, benefits. For pay, this includes when the last check will be issued. Discussion of severance if it's applicable. and any other financial benefits that the person is owed. In terms of benefits, the most important issue to communicate is when they'll lose health benefits. So the person knows that when they need to enroll in COBRA, purchase something in the market, sign on their spouse's policy, or whichever solutions that they choose. The reason you're calling this meeting is to let someone go. In and of itself, that's highly stressful, for everyone that's involved. But you don't have to endure any unnecessary stress associated with not being prepared. Follow the approach we just discussed so that you'll know most likely the questions that you'll face and how to address each one. That way, everyone stays at ease, and and all the people involved in it will be able to know what's going on. So this is something that's very important you should do. Okay. The majority of this course is designed to help you let someone go, right? A specific person you no longer want in the team based upon performance. And it is, however, to common let people go when their performance is completely acceptable, if the organization situation changes significantly. Now, there are many terms for this type of event. Traditionally, we've used the words layoff to describe letting employees go due to poor business performance, such as falling sales. You'll also hear the term downsizing, which simply means letting people go due to a restructuring or a significant change in strategy. Then we have what we call a RIF or an RIF, which means reduction in force, a term to describe changes in government and military employments. In any cases, all of these are about letting employees go for reasons other than their personal performance. Anytime employees are being let go, it's vital to make and implement these decisions with care. Your very first concern is a selection and the planning of the layoff. If you are part of the team preparing for some form of workforce reduction, remember these basics. First, do you have employees with employment contracts? Even if your state has at-will employments, a contract can trump your ability to let them go. To obtain and retain certain types of talents, contracts are often used, so make sure you examine your records carefully. Next, have you provided fair warning? Even under at-will employment, the federal law called the Workers Adjustment and Retraining Unification Act requires some employers to offer a certain amount of advance notice. Otherwise, they might owe their employees many of additional days of pay. Be careful because states have similar laws, though predictably they do vary. It's also importance that you do not discriminate or be seen as discriminatory. You know that it's illegal to be discriminating upon age, sex, race, disability, and so on. However, it is possible that you could intentionally avoid discrimination and yet have a layoff that disproportionately affects certain groups, whether it's intentional or it's not. Important related issue is selecting, employees to let them go based on tenure or merit. That is to, do we value how they do their job or how long they've been with us? Tenure is usually valued more by employees and to a certain extent the courts. And performance is valued mostly by managers. Taken together, all these issues present risks. That's why your best move early on the planning stage is to include an appropriate human resource and legal advisors, whether they be employees or external experts or consultants. Since the rules and laws apply vary by state and also depends on the organization, quality counsel is very essential. Now in a procedural standpoint, we mentioned the needs to be able to, provide, prior warnings, okay? So we need to be able to provide these warnings. Now, to be frank, the honesty surrounding many explanations for these actions like these can be questionable. My advice is to be able to be honest as possible. The more genuine your explanation is, the more employees will respect the decision and to be able to continue well about the organization. Honest explanations also send messages that are clear as possible to outside stakeholders such as stockholders, investors, customers, clients, patients, vendors. The final issues to address with the employee are the odds of returning, the severance pay, any unemployment benefits, and any assistance with their job search. Concerning the odds of returning, don't be optimistic. Be honest with them. And don't promise them a job. If you desire, you can promise them preferential treatment in hiring should a job materializes in the future. But that is it. Okay? Severance is basically simple. Once a decision has been made, you offer what you've decided to offer. Do keep in mind that the employee's, view of the company upon separation has a strong effect on their desire to come back and their willingness to speak well about the company in the community. Thus, erring on generosity is very useful. Okay? With unemployment benefits, assuming they're not being let go for performance reason, your goal is to simply inform them of their rights and provide them with the information they need to get started. Finally, whatever your policy may be, make sure the affected employees know what to expect in terms of using you as a reference for a job in another organization. Also, be sure that they know of any related job search resources your organizations may provide. Letting people go under any circumstances is very difficult. And at the same time, it can be very difficult, especially if they're good employees, being let go for no fault of their own at all. You can help yourself and your team and those affected by starting with the advice we just covered. That way, the separation can be very smooth, clear, and hopefully productive for everyone that is involved in this, okay? So, when letting someone go, it's important to get the details correctly. And two of the most important are choosing the right time, the right place to tell the employee about your decision. There are two types of cases here. The first is that when the person has done something so extreme that it warrants an immediate dismissal. The second one is the person is being let go because of performance issues, but the issue is not as extreme, and thus scheduling a more thoughtful process to be executed in the coming days will be preferable. In the case of extreme behaviors such as violence or threats, bringing weapons to work, viewing banned or illegal material on the work computer, or even stealing. In these cases, first consider whether or not law enforcement or company security is needed, based on the nature of the offense. To address the person, remain completely calm and polite. When you're confident the person is safe and others are safe, the next step includes finding an appropriate witness, telling that person that they've been terminated, securing all company properties, allowing them to collect personal belongings, and escorting them from the building. Any other matters can be discussed later on by phone or by mail, right? So for most cases, you want to thoughtfully schedule when exactly the best time is to inform that employee and let them go. Here's the rub. Not everyone agrees when is the ideal time to let someone go. What most people do agree on is that you should avoid termination around major holidays, birthdays, unless it's absolutely necessary. To violate this rule is to create an excessively high amount of stress or unneeded stress. Observers also agree that you should strive to let someone go at a time when the workplace is not at its peak capacity so that you minimize any embarrassment that may be associated with this event. Some experts say that you should try to do it early in the week so that the employee doesn't think you milked them for extra days when you already knew you were going to terminate them. Other experts say you should do it late in the week so that you don't disrupt the work of others. Of course, this can make the employee feel used and will set them up for a difficult weekend, which is a tough launch to a new job search. Some say, you should do it in the middle of the week so that they don't feel they've showed up unnecessarily on Monday and don't feel tricked or abandoned by Friday. The thinking goes that if you do it midweek, they can seek legal or other professional counsels and actually get started on their next chapter. You have a lot of options, but here's my quick advice. And I really do feel that this is a good advice. If you let someone go as soon as possible when you make that decision, assuming that it's not on the holiday or the birthday, okay? This way you minimize the suspicions and rumors and the threat of continued or worsened performance problems. It's time to stop the bleeding as soon as possible, right now, right here, okay? Next is the decision is where to hold that great big conversation. Just to be clear, don't have it in their office and don't have it in the open for others to hear. These environments are not the safest, and don't position the employee to be mentally ready to be able to have that, conversation. So you really have two main choices: your office or in the office of the appropriate human resource representative. If the employee largely respects your authority and you anticipate no real problems, then your office is fine. If you're the boss and don't have an office, right? Then use a conference room. Okay. If you have serious problems with this employee and you fear that they don't respect you or your authority, honestly, have it done at the HER or at somebody else, some other managers. It's very important that this employee understands that this decision is final and that the company is actually backing your decision. Terminating them smoothly with no mistakes can take, a lot of details and a lot of care on that, okay? So pay attention to what you're doing, what dates, but make sure you're just prompt, and implement that decision as soon as possible, as soon as you make that decision. To help them hear you effectively, be sure to have the conversation in your office or in the HR. If you have all these guidelines, you can definitely make sure that you have a better process than not being ready at all. Okay. Next part is scheduling is talking about scheduling the meeting. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So here's some examples of how to be able to get that set it up. You need to be able to speak to the person whom you wish to let go in order to schedule a meeting where you're actually going to deliver the news. Okay. Many bosses dread this interaction. The decision has been made. Mentally, they've already begun to move on. And so they sometimes don't continue dealing with the matter in the same thoughtful way. For example, this often results in managers approaching the person out in the open in front of others. Depending on how the person reacts to the manager's suggestions that they need to schedule a meeting, things can get awkward quickly, okay? If so, you just made things odd for them, for that person and for yourself and for everybody else that has seen this exchange that you just initiated. So, how do you really do it correctly? First, let's think about when to do it. First thing to know is that the date and time of the termination meeting will have to be determined based on the person's ongoing work and the severity of the reasons for the termination. Once the date and time has been set, the best answer for when to speak to them and schedule a meeting is very close to your desired meeting. So ideally, just an hour before or a few minutes before, hours or minutes, not days, okay? The more time you allow between, setting the meeting and carrying it out, the more likely something odd can very happen. For example, their work somehow changes, letting them go immediately more difficult. This could be due to client needs or due to relationships the person has in other departments. It's also possible that somewhere in the chain of the people who know about the pending termination, someone will talk. Yep, it happens. To be frank, people often find it difficulty to keep working with secrets. And if some version of this information gets back to that person, you can face a very difficult conversation. Now, even if no rumors are at play at all, if that person reads your attitude and behaviors as odd, okay, they might react unproductively. Remember, this person has been through an escalated process of critical feedback and performance improvement plans, so even small changes in your demeanor might clue them in. And when it does, this could lead to more than just an odd conversation, okay? It could lead to neglected customers or more extreme behaviors such as theft or sabotage. In general, assuming that the decision has been backed by great documentation, the decision has been made, a date and time is chosen in the very near future, then you'll go see the person and set the meeting very close to your desired meeting time. Okay, that's the when, okay? The how is also very important. The short answer here is face-to-face and private, not publicly and not electronically. Yes, in person, they will have a chance to ask the questions that you'll have to deal with, but in person is the best way to show respect and ensure the meeting gets on the books. Electronically communications is impersonal, and you don't always know when people will read it and respond as well. Nonetheless, in person, be ready for the predictable questions. For example, they might say, "Sure, I'm really busy though. Can this wait?" This one is easy. Tell them you appreciate how busy they are, but you only need a few minutes. That is a very likely to be followed up by, okay, what's this about? In response, you'll just say, we'll talk about it at 2 o'clock. I'll see you in a few minutes. Then casually walk away. Finally, you might hear, well, can we just talk right now? To which you will reply, no, I need to finish something for a few minutes. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Again, casually turn away. During this entire exchange, remain calm, face them comfortably, and try not to act hesitantly, okay, or appear bothered. Some conversations would rather not have, but that doesn't mean we can't avoid them. The more difficult the conversation, the more you have to ensure you get it right. Remember the advice we just gave you, and make sure you get that meeting set without raising any unnecessary concerns. Okay, so let's go ahead to the next part, conducting the termination. One of the keys to be able to have a problem-free termination is to be able to make sure that you know everyone's role. With a few exceptions, there are only three main players: you, the person who's being let go, and sometimes a third party, right? Such as human resources or a lawyer or another manager or the owner of the company. Okay, let's start with you. Long before this meeting takes place, you would have made the decision and started the progressive steps to be able to ensure that this person was given all the help, assistance, and second chances that they deserved. Then you've documented this whole entire process, made the decision for termination, and went up the chain of command and followed proper policies to be able to ensure your decision was valid. And finally, you scheduled the actual meeting. And now here you are. At the actual meeting, your first role is to be an information provider. Your second role is to be appreciative, to be that appreciative employer. Let's also be clear about the roles you won't fill. You're not going to be that emotional sympathizer or negotiator or person who engages criticism. Okay, as the information provider, you first deliver the news that they're being terminated. Then walk them through all the issues related to the benefits and the compensations. Then share the process that is about to happen, okay, that will allow them to gather their belongings before being escorted from the building. A smaller role for you is to be able to be the appreciative employer. This means offering a few appropriate thank yous for their contributions, but don't go to any big details or gush on them in any way. It is, however, very important that you don't allow your desire to say thanks and be nice to allow you to become sympathetic, okay? If you really want to feel sympathy for them later, you can, but not right now. In addition, be careful to avoid negotiating. It's very common that they'll want to negotiate. Many people, when they find out that they're being fired, don't want to accept it. They might ask if there's something that they can do to change anything. They might promise to do better. They might ask for another chance. They might even tell you they'll accept any job that you have for them. Be clear. The decision has been made and it's not negotiable. During this whole process, be very, very careful not to be negative or condemning in any way. All the thinking about them and about their performances in the past, the decision had been made that even if somehow that they agitate you in a meeting, there is no reason for you to be negative. I use the word clear because they might sit there yet hear nothing, okay? You want to be able to read their words, their gestures, to be able to gauge their understanding so you can clarify, as needed. So, okay? Now, remember, no sympathizing, no negotiating, and no negativity. Finally, we have a possible third party who might be with you, whether an HR rep, a lawyer, or another manager. Their role is simple. After greeting the employee, they remain quiet, listen, and take a few notes. This person only speaks up when the person realizes there's an error in the process, an issue or an item that has been excluded that should be addressed, or if they are asked by you for their opinion. Their job to be there is to be an impartial, to be there impartially. In case the employee puts a lawsuit or a complaint to you or to the company. There's a few meetings in your life that can be very stressful, such as this event. It can go smoothly if you know your roles, if you know the rules, you know the procedures. Now remember, this isn't just about having a fact-finding conversation. It's about delivering sensitive information effectively. Now, if you keep on following the advice I'm teaching you, you're going to be able to have a more clear understanding and to be able to make things go a lot more smoothly. Okay? Now, understanding the language of termination is the next process that we should learn. Finding the right language in a discussion about termination, you know, you know, may be very tricky. Okay, anytime that people sense conflict and stress, the right words can be very difficult. But if it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, we need to be able to make sure we use language productively. First, let me describe the characteristics of effective language. When we use these on termination meetings, consider these characteristics: direct or non-evasive, unemotional, not emotional, owned, not disowned, and finally simple and not complex. Let's briefly consider each one. First, the direct or non-evasive means to say that you say clearly what you want to say without beating around the bush. The purpose of the meeting is to let someone go. And that's the very first thing that you should definitely address. Don't start by asking about how their week is or about commenting about an email that everyone just received. Get to the point immediately. Next, be sure that your language is delivered emotionally. Unemotionally, not emotionally. There are many times, and places and work where the emotion of the positive, variety can be very useful. Generally, negative emotions are never useful. And there are a few places where being unemotional is very and absolutely appropriate for that time. Any elevated emotions will distract them and possibly mislead them, either about your intentions or about their ability to be able to maneuver out of the situations. Don't allow that. Remain unemotional. It's also important for you to use language that is owned and not disowned. Show that you made this decision, not someone else, and don't place blame for this event for some management committee or group. You should own it up. You made the call, and your language should reflect that reality. Owning the decision will be tough, but it's the best way to ensure that they hear you and respect your decision. Finally, your language should be simple and non-complex. For example, I've decided to let you go is much better, than upon deep reflection and consideration, I made a determination for a permanent separation from the team is very appropriate. Don't use that. Don't overdo it. Okay? Strive for simple language that cannot be misconstrued. With all that in mind, consider these, examples. Hey, John, come in. Please have a seat. Sarah from Human Resources. Yolanda, we're meeting today because I decided to let you go. After several conversations you and I had about the year and a half, I decided that your performance is unacceptable. Today, I want to be able to share that with you and also inform you that about your rights and your obligations concerning things such as benefits, benefits or compensations. Then you also have time to be able to collect your belongings before you would have to leave. Okay, you'll notice that what I've done here is that I've introduced another person in the room, and without any fluff, I stated the reason for the meeting without any hesitation and ambiguity. Okay, then I followed by concisely stating the remaining agendas. Here's an example. Hey, John, go ahead and shut the door, please. John, you and I have been discussing about your performance for several quarters now. We've had several tough conversations, and we've also had for performance improvement plans. I made a judgment that these efforts, are not working. I've decided to let you go. Today, I want to be able to share this with you. Are there any questions that you may have? And also make sure you be aware about how this affects your benefits and your compensations. Later, when we're done, you will have the opportunity to be able to gather your personal materials before being escorted out of the company. Now, look, the delivery has to be straight to the point and completely owned. But at the same time, you want to be polite as well and unemotional. It's also true that if you stick to the characteristics that I've mentioned, you'll also avoid other traps in the conversation, such as small talk, humor, any apologies. Okay? Some small talks really serves no purpose here, and there's no value added. Humor can send the wrong message. It might say to them, okay, that you are negotiable, that you can be talked about, or you can talk to you. Any apologies, such as things didn't work out, need to be taken out and shouldn't be used. That suggests that somehow the cost can be transferred to you that could be your fault. It's often been said that we should choose our words wisely, especially in a termination meeting. Spend time before the meeting thinking through what words to use and how to use it effectively in regard to this particular content. Make sure you follow these particular advices, and you'll definitely deliver the information that they should hear while avoiding any problems or ambiguity that you don't want to create. Okay? All right, let's move on. Next step is delivering, delivering the news. So, letting somebody go can be very stressful, right? So we need to be able to pay attention to the closer details. So let's take a look at the specific information that you need to be able to share with the employee that you're letting go. Now, please keep this in mind. This is an extremely high stress situation for you, but especially for them. Okay, so be practical. And it doesn't have to have a box of tissues available in the meeting. You'll be sharing with them the decision that's been made, information about benefits, and so on. But before reviewing the specific bits of information to be shared, please remember this simple process, okay? Deliver, confirm, and take questions. First, calmly and clearly deliver your message. Be clear, unemotional, and concise. Next, through their words, body language, and through the use of questions, be sure that they actually heard you. The information you're sharing is very important, and under high stress, it's sometimes hard for people to focus and to be able to hear you. Finally, following each small chunk of information, if they look particularly confused or worried, you can ask them if they have a question. If they ask you why they're being let go, as we've discussed before, you won't have much to say. But if they have questions about benefits or pay, for example, you'll want to help them understand the situation as clearly as possible. Okay, here are some of the major chunks of information to be delivered. The decision that's being made to let them go, information about the health and other benefits, information about compensation, any job search assistance that might be available, and the procedures for gathering belongings, returning company property, and actually leaving the workplace. When you're thinking about how to let someone go correctly, there are several things that you want to be able to remember to do. There are also many things you want to remember not to do. I want to be able to share with you a list of don'ts, things that you want to avoid and stay clear to be able to avoid any complications of letting someone go. Let me be able to start by mentioning two right away. Two no-nos to avoid leading up to an actual termination. First is actually executing the termination or process too quickly. This is very common if you start thinking about it. A minority of managers identify problem employees and move rapidly to remove them. So rapidly they don't forget to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and their decision causes more problems. Much more common are those managers who wait a little bit too long. One of the few universal truths about people at work is that people don't like conflict and they try to avoid it. Now, avoiding these things, avoiding proactive actions can cause problems or performance problems at where you work. There is no perfect pace. It depends on where you work, the nature of your work, and any existing procedures, or precedents that are in there. The same is true for documentation. How much do you really need to document in order to have an airtight case when letting someone go? The answer also will vary depending whether the company is unionized. Are there certain policies that you guys have in place? Thus the real answer for both pacing the process and documentation is to find folks in your organizations with more experience than you and ask for their perspectives. Okay, now let's consider several things to avoid saying. Here are a good list of verbal don'ts to remember. Don't give employees what they call false hopes. You might do this by saying things will be okay, or that you'll help them find a job, or something very similar. Don't address anything future for them, okay? This is not about being cold, it's being about honest, because you really don't know what their future holds, and that's for them to determine. It's also important that you don't console them or show strong empathy. Just to be clear, you want to be respectful and polite, but you don't want to say that you're sorry, or that you know how tough this is, or that you wish it didn't have to be this way. These statements may or may not be true, but in all cases, they can inflame emotions and cause the person to read too much into what you're saying. And it can actually include, it actually will help them to start thinking that they can ask you questions of why it happens. Also, don't pass the buck. You're holding this meeting. You are having this conversation. It's you who's most responsible for this event. Own it. Never blame the team, management, or organizational performance. In the long term, the more honest you are, believe it or not, the more that they will respect your decision. This leads to the next don't, which is don't debate. All right, data has been collected, and the decision has been made. That there's no reason at all that a debate can be made with that person. If they try, you simply redirect them immediately to the focus on the points you need to be able to make. And no matter what happens, don't get angry or defensive. Don't react to negativity that might show you. You know, don't instigate any negativity at all. At all, no matter what, how much you feel, don't instigate any negativity. Also, remember, don't give advice. Having watched their performance and concluded that they need to be let go, you will no doubt have a long list of things they should consider. But don't bring it up at all. Discussing any of those factors is so unnecessary at this point and can be viewed as very demeaning. It might seem strange, but sometimes success is just as much about what you don't say as much as what you do say. That certainly is also when you're doing something like this about letting somebody go. So make sure you keep on watching these videos so that you become more clear about what steps to be taken, okay? The next part is closing the meeting. That's right, closing the meeting, how to be able to end it, okay? Sitting through a termination meeting, even though they're usually very short, can be very exhausting by the end for everyone involved. That's why it's very important to wrap up the meeting perfectly and correctly to be as much productive as possible. Remember these actions at the very end of the meeting. First, offer a quick summary of the most important points you face or you feel that the person should hear. Every person is different on how they react and what's important to them. So, for example, if they show a particular concern about an issue, restating what they need to know just to be sure would be very helpful. And be sure that you end the summary by reiterating who they can call or email for further questions once they've left for the day. After the summary, take questions. If they inquire about the information you shared, try to restate and add clarity to it. If they ask you a question honestly don't know how to answer, write it down and tell them that you'll get back to them, okay? And always be sure that you write, what their preferred phone number would be. If they ask about their performance or their termination decision, that's very off limits. So immediately redirect them to the next topic you'd like to address. Which brings us to the final topic, escorting the person to the workspace and eventually, out of the building. There's no perfect process here. Some companies allows, people to be able to return to their workspace with instruction on which items to turn into, to HR, or simply just leave everything in their desk before they're vacating. Other organizations have very strict protocols. Depends on what yours is, where somebody actually is supervising the person empty their desk. Sometimes they're really not even allowed to return to the desk where they're handled that box, with all their personal items. This actually minimizes the potential risk. So it depends on what you want to be able to do. So here's some two options I want to be able to share with you. First, whatever your preference is on what approach it is, it's always be sure to use it consistently across all employees. Have a formal policy and apply the policy the same way each time to every single employee. This is not only fair, but reduces the possibilities of liabilities later on. So assuming you preserve no risk of violence or theft or anything like that, the simple, respectful path is to talk with them in private at the end of the meeting about what needs to be turned in or who will be accompanying them to their workspace, okay? Preferably it's you, if not you, an HR representative or manager. Otherwise, it's if someone's from secretary. Now, if it's truly unneeded, don't use a security. It could also send a very horrible message to the others involved in the, or when they're seen by fellow employees. Okay, so you might also want to be able to mention something like this too. It's best if we're approached by someone who starts a conversation to simply tell them that you'll speak to them later, okay? The goal is to be able to help them retrieve what is theirs and exit the building quickly without allowing others to become involved in the process, okay? Even if you time this event correctly so that the office is less full, there's still a chance that other people will pick up into this. Especially if they see people putting their personal belongings into a container. Don't engage them in a conversation in any way. If someone walks up and says something, wave them away and say you'll get back to them, okay? The whole process at their desk should take only about 2 to 3 minutes tops. When that person's done, you know, escort them out to the building. Make sure you let them know about the conversation, about the contact information to be able to for them to be able to get a hold of you. What you need to do is you need to make sure that the conversation is short and to the point. Okay. So when you send them off, make sure you apologize to them automatically. Make sure that I'm not apologize. Make sure you thank them for their services and keep everything short. Okay. Always give respect. If you want to be able to get respect, you want to be able to give respect. So get respect, give respect, give respect, then you get respect. Okay. So if you have any more questions, keep on watching the videos or go back to the videos that we provided you guys. It's very helpful. I'm truly believe that this is a very important thing for you guys to be able to be learning. Now also understand this is that once you've done everything, once you've literally, told them about that they're being let go, once you've, if you handled any negative, problems that has come up with it, or at the same time as everything went on smoothly, once that person leaves the building, there is more to do other than that. You need to be able to make sure that you actually speak to your staff, your fellow staff members, the people that are still in the office, who's going to have to take over for some of that person's work that has got left behind. You want to be able to make sure that everyone's aware and talk to them. The last thing you want to do is not share with them information. It's very good to be able to talk to the staff so that they can actually open up themselves to you and to show that you care. When we get rid of people, we want to be able to also address the fact that what's been done, but at the same time is what can happen the moment that person leaves. And things can get very uneasy. People, sometimes there's these beliefs of staff members or people that work for companies that people go in threes. Sometimes that people get fired 3 at a time. And you want to be able to kind of break that stuff and reiterate to the staff that, they're so valuable for you. That everything that they do is very important for you, and what the decision that has been made was made because of the company, because of the business, because in turn we're trying to be able to make sure that the company is turns out to be better. Now, for example, for your company, if you, let's say for example, have a healthcare company or a home health agency, or a training school program, or wherever, whatever industry, especially in the healthcare field, the turnover rate is very high. And at the same time, as our goal is not to fire people, but to find the right people to hire. Ultimately, that's everybody's main goal, is to get the right people to fit together like a puzzle, like a perfect puzzle, to be able to facilitate and create an organization that is ultimately the most important thing, to be able to have a very good work environment where everybody works together pretty well. But at times you will have to get rid of people, because there are people that unfortunately is going to cause problems within the company, and if you are not able to properly let them go, that can cause problems in the future. I've also seen companies as they've grown from let's say for example a home health agency that I do some seminars with, or I do some consulting with, where I've seen agencies grow from no clients to 50 50 average census on a monthly basis to all of a sudden 100 patients a month. Or even then after that, even more. Sometimes the staff members who are great at what they do for a company that's below 100 are not the right people that can handle above 100. And that's where we need to go, and we need to be able to start understanding is that we slowly have to make sure that we have the right people working for us. I'm glad that you guys watched this video. I truly wish that this has helped you. Now remember, this video series that you just watched, the advice that we give, is something that we have accumulated through the talks with our own legal team. But at the same time, as each event is very can be different. So make sure any decisions that you make, that you always consult with your own, law team. This is just advice that has helped my organizations or the companies that I've consulted with and worked for. But in the end, no matter what, you need to be able to make sure that you follow the law in your state, and at the same time where you are and the area that you're with. So make sure you always consult your lawyers or your legal team. Once again, this is Michael from Home Health Success Academy. I just want to say thank you so much for watching these videos. Our goal is the complete success of your company, and we hope that you enjoy these video series. Any more questions, give us a call back.